Point Spread Weekly, powered by the Vegas Stats and Information Network. We want to make you a better handicapper, and we've got plenty of sports wagering information. Join VSiN's betting experts and odds makers as they discuss sides, totals, money lines, props, and parlays, so you take sharper action. Cashing tickets is what it's all about. It's Point Spread Weekly, powered by VSiN, and it starts right now.
Welcome in. Yes, Point Spread Weekly edition as we dive into our magazine here on the Vegas Stats and Information Network. A lot of info every single week in Point Spread Weekly, and a lot of our guys are always contributing. And the first guy up, Matt Youmans, of course, our senior editor.
Okay,
he hates the term senior editor, but he is with us now. Nice enough to give us these few minutes. Youmans, thanks as always, man. Let's dive right in. So obviously the theme of this week's Point Spread Weekly, all about power ratings and how you start from there. So what was the inspiration? Because I would assume you guys get questions all the time, like, hey, how do I do this? How do I start? Because I had those questions before I made my own all those years ago.
JVT have, been asked that question for over 10 years. Like, it's people who are new to sports betting want to know when you say things like, I made this number 5. Well, how did you make the number 5? Well, I'll tell you what, I started by making power ratings. In a lot of cases with college basketball and college football, you start by making power ratings, and that's how you make your own numbers on games. Now, you don't have to make power ratings to be a successful sports bettor. But if you want to, we're trying to explain how you could set up, your own set of ratings if you want to. It's not mandatory to do it, but, we all have a lot of time this summer. So if you're going to work on your handicapping skills, this is the time to do it, because you got 2 or 3 months here where you could work on your college football ratings, your college basketball ratings, your NFL, your NBA, whatever it may be. I don't do NFL ratings. I consider the NFL more of a situational handicapping sport. It's, to me, more of a situational handicapping exercise, and also kind of a public perception deal. I can make numbers. I've said a lot of times, an orangutan could make numbers in the NFL in a lot of cases. I can make my NFL numbers before they come out on Sunday night and be within 1 point on basically every number. You can make NFL numbers in your sleep. I think most people can. I don't really think doing power ratings helps you to handicap the NFL, but that's my opinion. Some people might have a different opinion. So you do whatever works for you. I enjoy doing college basketball power ratings, and it helps me sometimes to make numbers on games. It definitely helps when you're heading into the postseason. And I think there are a lot of different points in the season where power ratings come into play and can help you a little bit. But college basketball, I think you have to do them with 350 teams. I don't rate all 350 teams, but I will rate, more than 100 of those teams, and I can come up with a power rating on a team anytime I need to. And in college football, I think it especially helps to have those as well. When Chris Andrews puts up his college football games of the year in the summer, Paul Stone will be one of the guys out in the sports book firing on those numbers, and he will be betting differences on his ratings to Chris Andrews' ratings. And Paul's had a lot of success, betting, whether it's a Golden Nugget or elsewhere, college football openers in the summer, because he's got a very strong set of power ratings. If you've been doing this for a while, you have ratings from the previous season that you can work off of and just tweak a little bit for the next season. College football, I don't think it requires many dramatic changes. College basketball, you have more personnel changes, and you will have to make a lot more adjustments from one season to the next. You have to make a lot more adjustments early in the season in college hoops. But, it's just another thing that if you want to, fine tune your handicapping and betting skills, this would be the time to do it, because the next 2 or 3 months is when you can explore a lot of different things maybe you didn't have time to do in the past.
All right. Matt Youmans with us, of course, our senior editor here at VSiN, writer for Point Spread Weekly. Now, the only issue, of course, at this time, you can use everything you possibly can at your disposal, Matt, but you also have to test your power ratings at some point. So you can have your format, you can have everything out there, but there is nothing better than actually putting them to use and getting your hands dirty and betting on a lot of these sports and setting them up so you can see how accurate that they are. Matt Youmans is with us, of course, here. This is Point Spread Weekly. We have a lot to get to. Our theme today, power ratings and how you make your own here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. All right. Point Spread Weekly back. It's Matt Youmans on the horn with me, Jonathan Von Tobel. Our theme, of course, power ratings, how you can make your own. And Youmans, in your piece for Point Spread Weekly, you talk to a lot of people, a lot of names, both odds makers and bettors. And I think the first question everybody has is, right, where do you begin? Where do you start? Everybody's different. I made this case when we were talking a couple of days ago on My Guys in the Desert, that sometimes what you can do, you mentioned like the NFL, for example, you don't really think it's more situational. You don't have to start right away in terms of making power ratings there. What Jeff Fogel and I have done every single week in the NFL season is make market power ratings. So essentially take the closing numbers, do your math, subtracting home field advantage, setting up what the market thinks of these teams. And if you want to do that, then you can have a basis and you can actually alter those numbers as well. My point overall is that there's so many different ways to start your power ratings, and that's just one of them.
Yeah, and Jeff Fogel's a guy who's going to be more math-based, obviously, and you are in the NBA. You're going to be a lot more math-based than a lot of guys. You know, a lot of old-school handicappers, and I lean more to the old school, don't use an abundance of analytics. You know, I do use a couple different sets of ratings, like from Ken Pomeroy or the Haslam ratings in college basketball. Paul Stone uses the Sagarin ratings. Richie Bachelari, who's in one of the stories I wrote in Point Spread Weekly, you know, he started his power ratings by using the Sagarin ratings 20 plus years ago, and those were published in USA Today. So you can use somebody else's ratings as a kind of a starting point to help build your own set of power ratings. It's interesting with the NFL. There's certainly different ways to handicap it, different ways to make your numbers. But, you know, Richie Bachelari pretty much agreed with me in that, you know, your process with the NFL, a lot of times the numbers are shaped by public perception, you know, and a lot of times the betting market will overreact in the NFL. And to me, it's more of a situational handicapping ordeal. It's also about matchups, and it's about public perception and overreactions, you know, from week to week. So that's why power ratings really don't do me much good in the NFL. If they do you good in the NFL and you're having success handicapping with ratings, go ahead and do it. You always stick with what works, right? So Somebody asked me in the past couple of days, why do I have to have power ratings? I said, you don't have to have them, but they help in several cases. And if you want to experiment with developing your own set of power ratings, now is the time to do it. And for me, college basketball is where they come in the most useful.
Right, and we've seen, and I think baseball season, right, Youmans, is where we see this a lot more because the season's so long, and a lot of guys in baseball have their numbers where sharp bettors will be on one side constantly. And even though it keeps blowing up in their face, I always use the example of John Lester like 2 years ago where they kept betting against him, remember? Because their numbers said that he was getting a little lucky, but he had won like 12 straight starts. So sometimes your power ratings work against you if you're too staunch and you're too stubborn with them.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, we could do an hour or 2 hours on this topic, but, I'll just make it brief. You know, a lot of times the old school handicapping approach will blow up in your face. I've seen a lot of cases where the math, the math handicapping blows up in your face. And I've told you the story before about a guy who's strictly a math-based baseball handicapper. And you read his write-ups, and it looked like something written by Stephen Hawking. You know, it was there were so many numbers in there. It was like the launch codes to a space shuttle, and he lost 21 games in a row before he shut it down for the season. So math doesn't always help you handicap the games. I think you have to use a combination of math and your own feel and your own handicapping sense to get the best of both worlds. I think, you know, what we try to do in Point Spread Weekly is offer a variety of perspectives on it. You know, Chris Andrews, Vinny Maiulo, we've got Richie Bachelari, Paul Stone, Bruce Marshall. You could go on and on. We got several guys who contributed to this, and you've got your own take, you know, on NBA ratings. And Steve Makinen does a great job with his NFL. And I think that's part of the value of Point Spread Weekly. You don't just listen to one person. You're gonna read what, you know, 7 or 8 different people say, or you're gonna watch our shows, and you're going to hear different perspectives. And that way that can take what you like, throw out what you don't like, and that's how you form your own philosophy.
Matt Youmans, again on Twitter at Matt Youmans 24/7, our senior editor here at VSiN. Youmans, always good to hear from you, man. Thank you very much. Talk to you next week, okay?
Hey, you bet. Okay.
Again, and in Point Spread Weekly this week, a how-to guide for making lines and power ratings from one Matt Youmans. And he's absolutely right. Nothing is, I think, finite and essential when it comes to power ratings, right? We brought up the scale. When Jeff Fogel and I would make market power ratings for the NFL, again, how the market bet on these teams and how the market power rates them. Again, you, the better, is the market. Our scale was, I think, a playoff team was at about an 86. Some of the best teams, like the Patriots at their peak last year when they were beating up on a really bad team, the bettors kept coming in on them, and they were covering numbers, was about a 96, somewhere in that range. My NBA power ratings, my scale is actually pretty high the way I rate these teams out. The Milwaukee Bucks, for my NBA power ratings this season, they're the highest rated Eastern Conference team. Obviously, some can make the argument that they're the highest rated team, period, in the association. But my rating for them was a 160. And so, again, my scale is a little bit different than somebody else's scale. I've seen college football power ratings that are kind of in the same range as my NBA ratings. It's all how you grade out certain teams and what you want to do with it. So I think that is like the big takeaway here is we're going to talk to multiple handicappers on Point Spread Weekly is what do you do with your power ratings and how do they do it? And you can pick the brains of multiple people and you can see how they do it. And you will come to find that there is not one set way to do things with power ratings. With that, let's hit up one of the best college basketball handicappers that I know out there, Bruce Marshall, editor of the Gold Seat. Bruce, it's good to hear from you. I haven't talked to you for a while, so I hope you've been doing well. As you know, our theme here, Point Spread Weekly, is power ratings. So I just wanted to start with you because college hoops, there are so many teams. There's so much to get to. What's your starting point for a lot of these college hoops teams, especially because there's so much roster turnover and smaller rosters. So when you lose one player, their value is a little bit stronger than a little bit more turnover, let's say, with a college football team.
Yeah, Jay. Yeah, nice to hear from you. Nice to hear a voice other than Andy Griffith watching on reruns on TV here. So that's welcome development. Yeah, you're right. College hoops is the biggest challenge just because of the number of teams. But you have to have a starting point somewhere. And early in the season, we're going to probably see more adjustments. But you've got to start somewhere. Now, it's all, power ratings are not as mysterious as the concept is not as complicated as people think. What's complicated about it is figuring out the relative strengths and weaknesses of each team, and then you're just sort of weighing that against one another. Where do you start from? Now, that's the challenge in this, I've always thought. And what we generally will do is look at where a team finished the previous season, where it was the previous season, and we use that as the initial barometer. Do we think a team is going to be better or worse? And we're looking at everything too. And so we arrive at a number at the outset that somewhat relates to where we had a team the season before and are prepared to make adjustments on that really quick. We're always, with power ratings, reacting to results, not point spread moves. So you're again weighing for the most part. So you're sort of weighing the relative strength of a team, and based upon what you see from results, and then you sort of figure in market conditions after that. But to start off, though, that's the hardest one, is to come up with an initial rating, and we usually use a measure against the previous season to come up with that initial rating, but are prepared to make a lot of adjustments early on. And yeah, college hoops, you hit that nail on the head. It is a lot more difficult to chart that than it is college football, for sure.
Bruce Marshall with us, of course, editor of the Gold Sheet, but also a author for Point Spread Weekly. Article this week, ratings are subjective, not absolute, from Bruce Marshall in this week's Point Spread Weekly. So let's talk about adjustments then, because I think, to me, Bruce, when I look at my power ratings, that's the hardest thing for me, is not over-adjusting, not under-adjusting, and being stubborn. You even mentioned in the piece, it's not just you or me. These odds makers have their power ratings too. They're slow to adjust to certain things. I remember the year that the Boston Celtics lost Kyrie Irving, right? And they made that run to the Eastern Conference Finals. Odds makers didn't catch up with how good the Boston Celtics team actually was. You were getting great dog prices in series, like against the Philadelphia 76ers. They were catching a good amount of points. They were slow to kind of catch up, but if you were there, you had your power ratings, you adjusted, you kind of saw it coming.
Yeah, and that's where, sometimes we can have as little advantage to where the odds makers are working in a little bit differently. Now, they have their power ratings too to arrive at numbers, but they sort of, and I know they put the number where they think it, and Jimmy will tell us this too. It's where we think the number should be, and it's not about splitting action. But they do have to react to the marketplace there, and it's the marketplace effectively sets a number, and where because the odds makers are going to have to move prices based upon how people are betting. They don't necessarily arrive at their original because of that. But you're right. Early on, though, I think you'll see the most movement, at least for us, in the power ratings when you at least have some results to go on there and performances, and you can and like we said, college hoops is a big ocean there of teams to look at, but you've got to react to something on it, and what you react to is results. And before a season starts, you don't have any results to go on, and that's why you'll normally see more of these adjustments. But it can take the odds makers, yes, but it's the wagering public has sometimes. It takes a while to warm up to a team, and they're the ones who are slow to react. And odds makers do react to what the marketplace does, and they'll have to. That's why numbers adjust, and sometimes the public is what's really slow in some of this stuff.
So another part of this, obviously, when it comes to power ratings, so you power rate your teams, you have your numbers, you're set to go in. You also have to, of course, take into account home field, home court advantage. How do you handle that? Is that more based on results? How do you view home court advantage? And let's just stick with basketball and home court and what a value is, because we know in the NFL and in college or in football in general, usually it's 3 points for home court advantage, or home field advantage, I should say. How do you handle home court advantage in basketball?
JVT, I have always thought this is very subjective, because this is something you're really not sure helps or hurts a team that much. The general thought in college hoops, a general number is like 4 that's used, and then you make adjustments from there. But we know for certain teams, it can be a lot more than that. And this is, again, where you're looking at results too, and how teams perform at home. And you could go as much as 7 or 8 on a home court value for some teams. We don't usually go above 6, and we can drop it down, much lower as well. But 4 is sort of the initial, sort of the normal barometer there. But I think that the home court thing, though, and I've always I've been in the past more apt to adjust home courts based upon performance than a lot of other. Like Mort Olson, the founder of the Gold Sheet, wasn't quite as apt to want to move power numbers and based at least move the home court, home field values as much as I might have. But 4 is sort of generally the where you start off, and you sort of use that as the barometer.
So what about, how do you handle inherent home court advantages? Not so much attendance or performance, but the first one that comes to mind, Laramie, right? Tough place to get to, altitude, things like that. How much does that factor in when you look at a lot of these teams that have that inherent home court advantage? How much is something like altitude and Laramie worth to you?
It depends. It depends on the team. There are teams that go in sea level every year and win up there. So I don't think Wyoming has an inherent advantage much. As opposed to a sea level team at home. The altitude thing, usually that's why teams come in there the day of the game usually, because for what it's worth, from what I've been told, that if you're there a couple of days, then that's when it really could hit you a little bit more. In basketball now, there are so many stops in the game. I think that can tend to be overrated. Wyoming has had a lot of years where you just look at the results and it just doesn't seem to help Wyoming as much at home. So I'm less inclined to do that. Also because a lot of people don't realize. I had somebody try to tell me once that when New Mexico was going to play a game up in Boise, this is going to be New Mexico going up to altitude. And they had it completely backwards, because Albuquerque's a lot higher. Albuquerque's as high as Denver. A lot of people don't realize that. So I usually those sort of things, I think, can be way overrated by the odds makers.
Yep. Bruce Marshall, of course, editor of the Gold Sheet. All right, we got about a minute left here, Bruce. Really quickly, I have my number set. I have 2 teams that are meeting up. How do I figure out this point spread?
Generally, just you figure out their power ratings, measure those against each other, and then figure in whatever you're giving a home court value, and that should arrive at a rough point spread on a game. So that's basically where you arrive at a number. Let's say Wake Forest was playing Virginia last season. And the game was at Winston-Salem. We gave Wake Forest 5. We have Wake Forest as a 10 rating. We had Virginia as a 3. We gave Wake Forest 5 points at home. So our original number would be Virginia -2. It's not more complicated than that. But then, based upon market conditions, you could adjust that number a little bit. But that's basically what all it is. It gives you a guide and a range to put a point spread, and that's how you use power rating.
Bruce Marshall, again, editor of the Gold Sheet. Check out his piece in Point Spread Weekly this week, of course, out now. Ratings are subjective, not absolute. Bruce, good to hear from you, man. Stay healthy, stay happy. We'll talk soon, okay?
Stay well, JVT. Thank you.
Got it. And again, Point Spread Weekly out every single Wednesday. This week, our experts take you through the process, making your own power ratings. And that is a theme here on Point Spread Weekly this weekend. But a lot of people have asked for information about the topic, everything you need in the pages of PSW. We talked to Matt Youmans. We talked to Bruce Marshall. Also within this piece, Steve Makinen, Paul Stone, who's going to join us later. You have Chris Andrews, Vinny Maiulo, of course, who mesh their heads together with Richie Baccelleri for college football right around this time of the year as they get ready for that. And Aaron Renning and Kenny White both as well appear in this week's Point Spread Weekly. Check it out now. VSiN Plus subs are free. All you got to do is visit vsin.com. That's VSIN.com. Not done by a long shot here on Point Spread Weekly. Stick around.
Coming up on Point Spread Weekly, powered by the Vegas Stats and Information Network. We want to make you a better handicapper, and we've got plenty of sports wagering information. Join VSiN's betting experts and odds makers as they discuss sides, totals, money lines, props, and parlays, so you take sharper action. Cashing tickets is what it's all about. It's Point Spread Weekly, powered by VSiN, and it starts right now.
Welcome into Point Spread Weekly. Yes, we continue our roll through this week's edition of PSW. Ron Flatter, nice enough to give us a couple of minutes here today. Headline, handicapping shortened baseball seasons. Ron, of course, we know that the baseball season will be altered. More than likely, it will be shortened. There's talks about it being pushed back and still extending it out to 140 games. We will see. We'll operate with the fact that we know it's shortened at this point right now. And you brought this up in your article as we get straight into it. Major League Baseball has a history of shortened seasons, not obviously pandemics, but with labor strife, correct?
Yeah, 1972, 81, 90, 95, seasons were either postponed or interrupted. And for a period of time, lack of training, a relative lack of it.
Here, let's see if we can reconnect.
Coming out of the long break. And what I've been able to glean.
All right, I think we got a faulty connection. Let's reset Ron Flatter here. So, of course, look, what Ron's talking about when he talks about handicapping shortened baseball seasons, and he'll get to it, but when you have this history of looking at baseball seasons that have been altered because of time, because of labor strife, you mentioned it, 72, 81, 1990, and 1995, you can dive into those seasons and see if there's any anomalies that pop up due to these shortened seasons, right? And the theme, of course, when you're looking at an article like this, as he kind of brings up, is that essentially what you could see, especially maybe early on, is that pitchers will start a little bit better than usual. Ron, sorry, you got a little bad connection there. So we're talking about this. When you looked at these seasons that were shortened because of labor issues, was there an overarching theme that you saw that popped out here? Was it higher scoring games, lower scoring games? What was it?
Lower scoring to begin coming out of these long breaks. Pitchers are a little ahead of hitters, maybe about a half run lower per game for the totals. Now, that's a rough number. You have to kind of go through and look at all this. 1995 was the exception, but don't forget that was the steroid era. And it was a very small sample size for the first month of that delayed season. But generally, a half run lower. So when you're taking a look at totals, what's the old saying that Randy McKay says? May the hook be with you. Maybe want to look at an under if you think that as you're mapping the game, it's going to fall to a certain total over the course of a season. Coming out of the chute after an abbreviated spring training, probably looking at a half run per game less.
So if you're talking about this from betting, if you're betting unders a little bit, having pitchers be a little bit ahead of the curve against some of these hitters, recommend maybe looking at this first 5 under specifically? Was there something that you're looking at overall that you could probably take advantage of, right? Like, so if pitchers have the advantage, I would rather bet under a first 5 with a single pitcher I know I'm going to have rather than trusting a bullpen, as we talked about multiple times in baseball betting in general.
Problem is with the dynamic of the earlier changes in terms of coming out of breaks, we didn't have openers. We didn't have launch angle and power pitching. We started to see that toward the late 90s, but not like we have now. And so in terms of a sample size, nothing really that we could glean from that point of view. All we could do is really kind of look at the treetops and just see what full games were in terms of totals. But yeah, I mean, starters were going longer back in those days, so you really can't take that and completely map it into today.
Ron Flatter with us, of course. All right, so we got about 90 seconds or so, Ron. Let's move. Of course, you're a man of many hats. We did see the Florida Derby go down over the weekend. When I talked to you last weekend, we talked about the big board, right, in terms of some value really deep in the board for some of these horses. Again, Kentucky Derby not until September. 'Tis the law, at least last look, about 5-2 over at William Hill to win the Kentucky Derby. Is that a little too short considering the time span we have until the actual Derby begins?
Not way too short, and I'm not even sure he should be the favorite, but look, we'll see as the summer goes along. Some of the horses you might want to look at that will be coming back into the Derby picture that might have been out of it. It had been in a May 2nd Derby. Maxfield, Honor AP, they had been injured. Dennis's Moment, he needs a regroup after just a terrible last couple of races. Mr. Monomoy comes back in the picture. Structor might yet be able to make his dirt debut. And of course, you always have one of those Bob Bafferts. He has yet to race, but he's been making a big impression in the mornings. A horse named Cezanne, a Curlin baby, $3.65 million he was sold for at his yearling sale. So keep an eye maybe on Cezanne. Not listed yet at William Hill, but he's going to be listed at some point during the course of spring or summer as we try to build up to the September Derby.
Now, last 30 seconds, Ron, what are some races that we want to keep our eye on as we look ahead as a novice horse racing watcher as myself?
The only one we know for sure, May 2nd, when the Kentucky Derby was supposed to be, the Arkansas Derby will be coming up. It was pushed to that date. We'll see what horses end up filling in there. But up until that point, we don't know how this is all going to be mapped. Santa Anita's closed. Aqueduct is closed. We just don't know at this point.
Ron Flatter, you can follow.
And we'll get to have a pretty good idea then.
All right, Ron Flatter up on Twitter. Again, Ron, appreciate some time. It's Point Spread Weekly. When we return, we're going to get into college football and the power ratings there. Welcome back to Point Spread Weekly. Remember, VSiN.com is the spot to go. PSW, all the subs are free until sports returns. You want to be a VSiN Plus subscriber, make sure you check it out up at VSiN.com. We head out to the phone line. Paul Stone, nice enough to give us a couple of minutes, up on Twitter at Paul Stone Sports. Paul this week wrote, find a starting point to college football ratings. Paul, of course, our theme, the power ratings in any sport, but for you, we're talking a little college pigskin, and I think this is the most important part. A lot of people really want to know, and it's always their first question, what is the starting point for any sort of power ratings, but what's the starting point for you when you look at setting these ratings up for college football?
Well, good to be with you, JVT, and hope everybody out there is doing well. I tell you, this is one of the most subjective processes, and a lot of sports handicapping is indeed subjective, but making power ratings is so subjective. I write in the article that beauty is indeed in the eyes of the beholder. So you have to, first of all, you have to determine the numerical scale, I think, that you're going to use for your power ratings. For me, it's always made sense for the top team maybe not to start the year at 100, but to eventually have the ability, based on margin of victory and the way that they develop throughout the year, to at least get to 100. So using last year as an example, I think I had Clemson and Alabama starting the year 1 and 2. I think I had Alabama 97 and Clemson 96.5 on the top end of my rankings. And then the 130th ranked team, which began the year 130th and ended the year 130th, was UMass. And I had UMass in the upper 30s, I believe. It's in my article, the specific power rating that I gave them. So that's kind of, you have to determine the numerical scale you're going to use, the range from top to bottom. Mine's pretty large. Most people are not going to have a range that's 55 or so points. But I think that's pretty indicative of what the line might be between a game between the best team of the 130 against the worst team of the 130. So that's kind of what my range typically is. So that's kind of a starting point. You need to determine your numerical values, and then we can go from there. And I can continue if you wish, or if you want to ask specific questions, just jump in anytime, JVT. Do you want me to just keep going? Or
so what I was going to ask actually, Paul, was so when we talk about the starting point, right? You always have, if you're starting power ratings right from the beginning for a season, you always have last year. And I was going to ask you, like, when you make power ratings, especially with football, because the rosters are so large, that sometimes, I don't want to say it's easier, but you have more to go off when you make football ratings as opposed to like basketball ratings. And if you miss 2 starters in basketball, the value for those 2 starters is immense. Whereas football, I know that you value position groups like offensive line, wide receiver, quarterback, and you can go from there.
Right. And I don't know if this was your specific question or one of them, but a lot of people are going to use the previous year's seasoned end power rating for teams as a starting point for the beginning of the next season. I don't fault that, but I don't do it that way. And if you're new to it, I think I probably would use that as a baseline. But I've been doing it long enough. I want to clean the slate entirely, just wipe it clean. I want to start all over. Obviously, some teams are going to be really good year after year. Some teams are going to be really bad year after year. Maybe you have, 30 of the teams that are going to be good no matter what, 30 that are going to be bad, and then we've got 70 left. But I want to wipe the slate clean. I want to look at them anew. I want to keep the season ends from the previous year power rating out of my mind and just start with a fresh slate and start developing that power rating. A lot of people, when they do their power ratings, they are going to assign numerical values to the quarterback, to the running backs, to the offensive line, to coaching, to the different position groups, and then add those numbers up to come with their power, to arrive at their power rating ultimately for that individual team. While I do look at the quarterback position, and I do rate quarterbacks like this year from 1 to 6, with 6 being the best, I don't assign numerical values to each position group in that style. So that's not my method of doing it, although I certainly can't fault that. I've been doing it for a long time, so I know what a 70 team looks like in terms of power rating by the way that I do it. I know what a 60 looks like, what an 80 looks like, so forth and so on. A good resource to use for a beginner just starting their power ratings, first of all, would be to look at this Point Spread Weekly, because you not only have my perspective, but you've got great articles from Bruce Marshall, you've got Richie Bacciarelli in there, you've got Matt Youmans. You just got so much good information, and you might, look at each of our articles or our quotes, and you might say, hey, I really like that from him and this from the other guy and so forth. Or maybe just one of us resonates with you, and you really don't find maybe a whole lot of value in the others. But you'll find something by looking at this week's Point Spread Weekly. But use Jeff Sagarin's rankings, if for nothing else, to see what numerical values he assigns, and he uses kind of the same scale that I do, with 100 being kind of the top of the line. And a team like LSU, just to explain, based on margin of victory and averaging close to 50 points a game or whatever, and the way that they just steamrolled their opposition, their season-ending power rating was in the low 100s. So they're anywhere from probably 102 to 105 for a person like myself or Jeff Sagarin, who uses the scale that we use. So look at his season-end power ratings. Look at the numerical values that he has assigned to the different teams and the different clusters of teams, and that'll give you a good idea of what numerical value ultimately to assign to your teams if you decide to use that scale. The slotting of the teams is something that you're really going to need to do on your own, or else you should probably just copy somebody's like Jeff Sagarin or another guy named Sonny Moore or some of the others who are published and easily accessible there on the internet. So, that gives you a little bit of information of how I would proceed to make power ratings and kind of how I do it.
Paul Stone, college football handicapper, of course, Paul Stone Sports. Paul, we got about 60 seconds. Maybe it's not enough time, but just general thoughts on adjusting from game to game. You drew a great picture in your article about the Louisiana Tech and Texas game.
Right. Early in the year, you're going to adjust more than you would later in the year. Some people are, kind of married to their power ratings. They fall in love with them. They won't move them more than, 1 or 2, maybe 3 points max, even early in the year. And I give it a little more range than that. We're working with information from year to year. Rosters can change, and we think we've got a feel for the team, but we really don't know until we see the product on the field. Maybe that quarterback who's replacing a veteran and the new quarterback's inexperienced, the veteran started for 3 years, maybe this guy's actually better. And maybe they got rid of some guys, some veterans who were entitled, and maybe the team chemistry is better. And maybe you thought this team was not going to be as good, but they're actually stronger. So I'll fluctuate my power ratings maybe 4 or 5 points from game to game the first couple of weeks. Once we get out of the month of September, you really have to tighten it up and maybe go to just 1 or 2 points a week adjustments based on the outcomes of the games.
Paul Stone, hey, appreciate it, man. Thank you very much. Good to hear from you. Be healthy, okay?
Same to you guys. Thanks for having me on.
You got it. Paul Stone. All right, we're not done. Point Spread Weekly. We roll on here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. All of us, of course, miss all the action. Quick Picks is here to help us with it. Take a side on an age-old argument. Who was better in their prime? Was it Kevin Durant in his MVP year back in 13-14? James Harden when he won it just a couple of seasons ago? The new Quick Picks Classic offers matchups of NBA stars based on their historical game stats. With Quick Picks Classic, you can play these matchups, win money on them too. Select your first ticket for as little as 10 cents, and there are new virtual matchups every hour. In an exclusive offer for VSiN customers, try Quick Picks Classic today. Get a 100% deposit bonus. Quick Picks Classic is available to play in 28 states, including New York now. For details, go to quickpicks.com/VSiN bonus, quickpicks.com/VSiN bonus. I'm Jonathan Von Tobel. This is Point Spread Weekly here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. We head out and we join Steve Makinen, the mastermind behind Point Spread Weekly. You read his work every single week without fail in PSW. Steve, appreciate some time as always. Good to see that you're doing pretty well. So let's start with this because you had a lot going on in Point Spread Weekly this week. Just your general thoughts on the missive itself this week, because I think we do a lot of good work every single week in Point Spread Weekly. But in terms of the information to help bettors get started with power ratings and how they get off their feet with this, I think it's a massive, massive issue.
Yeah, I in my index letter this week, I included a kind of a note about that, how I'm astounded, even the last 3 weeks, every week since this began, but the last 3 weeks in particular, about the creativity and the general talents of the staff that we have that's able to put together such a good issue in a time like this.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about this. So part of what you wrote about, of course, were win totals and maybe looking at overs and unders for specific teams. But I just wanted to start with the way you attack win totals in general, because with almost everything, right, win totals are derived from power ratings.
Yeah, absolutely, Jonathan. So, I mean, if you projecting a schedule out like I did in this week's Point Spread Weekly article, your power ratings are going to be based upon a lot of the ratings you'll see maybe for the season win total. So if you run against the schedules, there's only going to be slight differences. In fact, for this year, the biggest difference I had in what I projected off of the power ratings against the schedules is one win. So everything else is smaller than that. So you kind of got to look for some other reasons as to maybe why a team may go over or under, be better or worse than the prior year. And some of those things will be players they added, of course, coaching changes, close losses and wins from a year ago, how many turnovers they had. And I'm going to actually do an article next week that's going to kind of take what I did this week a step further, and then I think we'll eventually have a better picture as to which teams we might expect to improve or decline.
So it was one of the pieces from Steve projecting the 2020 NFL schedule. Opponents known, season win totals can be analyzed. So we know the opponents. We know what the home and away splits are, at least in terms of where teams will go. We don't know what order those games will be played in, right? We were talking about it on My Guys in the Desert the other day. There's a couple of these teams, like the New York Jets, for example. They have to go to Los Angeles twice. They have to go to Seattle. Like, those are 3 West Coast trips that are going to be pretty tough for them. We don't know what an order that's going to be. How much does the schedule actually alter when you're looking at it from these win totals?
I spoke about this last year before the season. I truly believe that the analysis of the schedules is so overrated in the NFL because of the fact that if you go to the halfway point in the season and you look at the last 8 games, what was looking to be a tough schedule might look to be the easiest schedule, based on how teams are playing and the momentum that they're carrying at that time. So if a team starts out fast, a team that's unexpected to start out fast, whoever's playing them the rest of the year, all of a sudden that schedule is going to look tougher. So very, very important to get off to good starts and build momentum early, and it can totally change a season.
The Raiders are a pretty good example, right, from last year. We made a lot about that stretch where they went from week 3 all the way to week 9 without a home game, right? They were playing in London, they were playing on the road, they were going to the East Coast, and they go through that stretch, and I believe they went 4-2 or something in that range. Like, they actually did pretty well on that brutal road stretch.
Yeah, they're a perfect example of that. And if you take a look back at that whole season in general, they managed to make a lot out of a season that didn't statistically project well. I think they were outscored by over 100 points and still won 7 games. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that team, especially moving to Las Vegas.
So as we look at some of the teams maybe in this piece, top 3 teams expected to maybe win more games than props that are up right now. And a lot of these, of course, courtesy of New Jersey. One of the first teams you list, the Tennessee Titans, FanDuel 8.5 over even money. Your projection was 9.5. And as you mentioned, 1 was the highest differential. So when you look at this for the Tennessee Titans, what stuck out to you?
Yeah, what's interesting about this is, as I analyze the schedule, Tennessee and Indianapolis actually have the easiest schedules. And we talked about how this can I guess, be misjudged at this point. But on paper right now, they have the 2 easiest schedules in the league. Tennessee has what I believe is a style that can carry over as well, too. So you won't see a big drop-off on a team that plays a more physical brand of football, maybe relies on play-action passing and a strong running game. So I think there's a good chance that they can maintain the success that they had at the end of last season.
How about the Carolina Panthers? I'm actually intrigued by this, and they're, again, one of your top 3 teams to expect more wins according to the prop. FanDuel 5.5 over -120. So when you look at the Carolina Panthers, obviously a lot of turnover, right, both with the staff and at key positions like quarterback. So how'd you factor that in when you looked at Carolina and their schedule?
Okay, well, there's some of this is based if you adjust a power rating on a return to normalcy type of thing. Obviously, a team's not going to be as bad. Carolina, as a franchise, went through a horrible season last year, obviously, and there's going to be a natural return to some of the normalcy there. But I'm not a big fan of the college coach coming into the pro, especially early in this. I do like the Teddy Bridgewater signing. I think that can stabilize some things, and I'm willing to give this one a little bit of benefit of the doubt here because they are facing a very low total of 5.5. That's I believe that's better than only one other team.
Right. And the other, of course, Cincinnati, the FanDuel win total 5.5. You project that to be about a 6, so a differential of a half. When you look at Cincinnati, how much not only is a schedule, right? Because we talked about this last week when we were talking specifically about Tampa Bay and the fact that you play the schedule, but depending on where you place, but the fact you're going to get an upgraded quarterback in Joe Burrow, you get a top pick like that, that's always going to project you forward.
Yeah, you have to assume that this is a Joe Burrow improvement. There's obviously Kyler Murray had some success bringing Arizona back up a little bit, and I would assume Burrow is going to have the same type of effect there.
Yeah. All right, let's take a look at some of the teams that you thought maybe projected to win fewer games than the prop that were listed again via FanDuel. I think the Rams are a really interesting team. So 8.5 over -120 over at FanDuel. Projection for you was 7.6. When you look at the Los Angeles Rams, we know what happened last year, of course. The play was inefficient on both ends of, not both ends of the ball, at multiple positions on offense, I should say. Jared Goff was not as efficient. The running game wasn't as efficient. And this is a team that thrives on play action. So what do you see with the Los Angeles Rams as maybe another step backward for Sean McVay's team?
Yeah, if you look at this team, to me, this is a situation that looks to be trending downward. I don't see how it returns, especially after some of the losses they said. A lot of key defensive players are gone for this season. is this a situation in your mind where you think possibly this McVay offense has been figured out and he's going to have to get a little more creative with things that he does? So to me, this is a team trending downward, and that's why I have them maybe a little bit down further than some other people might have on a power rating.
I think it's a great point. And we saw it, right? They were just churning along every single game. Then they run into Bill Belichick in the Super Bowl. It's kind of laid out there in terms of the blueprint. And then they just happen to have, a really inconsistent season on the offensive side. And it's easy to point at Todd Gurley in the bad play, but at the same time, they give all that money to Jared Goff. They hamstring their team, and they're stuck in a really bad spot where they might have to trade away Brandon Cooks too. So I would say there's something to that in terms of maybe being figured out a little bit, and McVay having to make an adjustment. What about also on this? I think a lot of people will be interested in. I think this was kind of coming. You saw it. Baltimore. FanDuel's got 11.5 over plus 105. Your projection, not a massive difference, but 10.9. What's the bounce here for Baltimore?
Okay, so this is again another probably a return to normalcy thing of sorts. Now,
right.
So what I did here this morning, I just looked at this and getting ready for the show, and there's been no team in the last 28 years that went 13-3 or better and didn't make the Super Bowl that actually improved. I mean, there's been a couple that stayed the same, but there's been none that improved. And the average drop was 4.15 wins per season. And that's, again, that's 28 years worth. So you put 4.5 off of Baltimore, and all of a sudden they're a 10-win team, even less. Something to think about. The disappointment of losing or not getting to a Super Bowl in a year where you were a dominant team, that can be pretty frustrating for a franchise and tough to bounce back from.
Not making it to the Super Bowl. How about not even making it to the conference title game, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Just a disappointment. So much was expected. Top seed, 14 wins. I mean, it had to be disappointing. What type of mindset are they going to be in come whenever the first game is?
Yep. All right. Our last 90 seconds or so here, Steve. So let people know again, Point Spread Weekly is available again. Go to VSiN.com. VSiN Plus subs are free. But what else do we have here in Point Spread Weekly? Because we didn't even scratch the surface in this hour-long program about the magazine itself.
Yeah, I mean, the power rating features are great. You're going to want to read those. I mean, there's probably not a single subject matter that I get asked more about. And I run 3 different sets of strength ratings in the VSiN Point Spread Weekly and on VSiN.com every day, every issue. And there's nothing more I get asked about. And there's a complete explanation this week on how to build power ratings, how to maintain them, what types of things can affect the team's power rating. Just a lot of great knowledge and they're being passed on by some of our staff.
All right, Steve Makinen. We appreciate time as always, man. We'll talk next weekend. Stay safe and healthy, sir.
Yeah, you too, Jonathan. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. Again, VSiN.com. A fantastic deal for all of those who are using this downtime to get ready for whatever sport that you choose. Again, I think the most important lesson from today and just overall when you read Point Spread Weekly, these power ratings are subjective. Nothing is perfect. We know that. There's nobody out there over a season long that is hitting 100%. So VSiN.com/subscribe and VSiN.com in general. VSiN Plus subs are all free. So make sure you check it out and make sure you open up Point Spread Weekly, not only this week, but every single week. It's VSiN, the Sports Betting Network.